All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. This is Web Wednesday, and things might look and sound a little bit different at the moment. To let everybody in on a bit of behind the scenes, we had a couple of little scheduling issues that wound up cropping up. So I'm actually in a conference room on campus. Leslie, who's going to be joining us in just a minute, is in a different conference room on campus. So we're broadcasting live from lovely Redmond, Washington. And yeah, so today we're going to be joined by Leslie to talk about the debugger inside Visual Studio. For those of you who've watched the show in the past, chances are you've seen Leslie come on once before, and she's coming back really to kind of just keep digging in and talk more about the debugger. Because after all, if you're anything like me, and I know I am, you spend an awful lot of time doing things like console log and print statements and so forth. And so we all know that the debugger is out there. We all know that the debugger is something that we should be using more often, but quite frequently we don't. And part of that is a lack of experience, and part of it's also just not knowing what's available to us, or maybe even not knowing how to get it set up. And so Leslie is going to show us how all of that works inside Visual Studio, and talk about just like debugging in general and so forth. And so that's what we have to look forward to today. It looks like Leslie is ready to go. So let's go ahead and bring Leslie on.
Hi.
Hi.
Long time no see.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's been all of about like 3.5 minutes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we're so far away. Yeah, Gordon's from building 18. He's in building 25, which is literally right across the street. So
You're for anybody who doesn't know, the bit of Microsoft trivia is that there is no Building 7 on campus. Although to be fair, these days, because there's a lot of construction going on, there's a lot of missing buildings. But famously, there was no Building 7, and the reason for that is because Microsoft numbers their buildings based on construction order, and they had already divvied out, hey, this is where Building 7 is going to go, and then they had started making 8, 9, and 10, and then they decided not to make Building 7. So there was no Building 7 on campus. It became like a little bit of like a joke or something like that to tell somebody to go to Building
it's almost like a conspiracy. It's like what happened to building 7?
7.
Bermuda Triangle ate it up or something.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll get all like all the red string and start
Yeah.
tying all of that together and so forth. So, but anyway, thanks for coming back, Leslie. It's always great to chat.
Yeah. Thanks for having me back.
So, for anybody who doesn't already know Leslie Richardson, and they should, who is Leslie Richardson?
Cool. Well, yeah. Hey, y'all. I'm Leslie. From Seattle, originally from Florida. Uh, I was on the debugger team for a good almost 3 years, and since then I've been on the Visual Studio extensibility team. But we're talking about debugging today, so I'm really excited to share all the new and existing tools that are available in Visual Studio debugging. That's the short version, anyway.
No, I love it.
My own show. I host the Visual Studio Toolbox show. In case you see me around.
Okay, very cool. And you're a Gator, if I remember right.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? Part of the game.
You you gotta be very excited then for the kickoff of college football season.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Yeah, it's weird to see the football team be actually good because when I was in school, we sucked. We were really bad. Like, it's embarrassing. You couldn't sell your ticket for that much money because nobody wanted to go.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and it's like the moment I graduated, it's like all of a sudden they're good now. I'm like, of course they are. So,
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, for anybody who's not familiar with like college football in the U.S., the particular like portion of the U.S. that Leslie went to school is huge for college football, so American
super
football.
serious.
Yeah, yeah. So, but anyway, cool. So, Let's start here, and I know we kind of started here last time, but I think that this is still a good place to start, which is for those of us console log type people, for those of us print type people, you know, why should we start using the debugger?
Yeah, so, like a lot of people, I wasn't really taught how to use a debugger formally in school or otherwise. So, yeah, just resorting to print statements a lot of the time, sometimes using an occasional breakpoint. And it can get the job done, but ultimately it can still be very time consuming. You have to stop and start your code's execution a lot of the time to add or delete console.log statements or print statements or whatever your language you're writing in. And yeah, that can that can take up a lot of time. It can be really tedious when there are a lot of tools that exist across lots of different IDEs and not just Visual Studio, but that's what we're focusing on today, that can really help expedite that process and ease a lot of the frustrations that we all experience when debugging. I can't, there's not a single developer in the world who doesn't have to debug something. And if you are that one who's never had to debug, what? Yeah, so I think they're tools that are extremely relevant to almost everybody, almost every developer, but yet not a lot of people are familiar with them beyond like maybe a basic breakpoint and some stepping mechanics. And that's sad because yeah, there's a lot of really cool tools that could really help you out way better than a print statement can.
And honestly, that's sort of like where I am. Like I remember back from many years ago, being a bit better at doing it inside of Visual Studio because I used to be a tech trainer, so I used to teach a lot of different courses. So I would teach people how to use the debugger, but very much do as I say, not as I do. When it's just me, coding in my own little home office, it's usually console log, and then
Yep.
Control Shift F to go find them all later on and comment them all out or delete them.
Mhm. And like I say, like even once you do get familiar with the existing tools beyond print statements and stuff, like you still have to get into the habit of it. Like there are times where I'm coding and sometimes I still resort to that good old print statement just because I can't help myself. But I have noticed that like the more and more I force myself to use those tools, the more it feels instinctual to use that over a print statement. So
Okay.
definitely persistence is key to this as well. So
I appreciate the little bit of honesty though of like, yeah, I still sometimes do it as well.
yeah, it's like nah, who uses print statements anymore? Oh my gosh, never again.
Cool. So, do you want to? Where do you want to go from here? Do you want to show us what the debugger looks like? Are there cool things to demo? Like,
Sure, I've got some demoable stuff we can check out.
yeah, let's do it.
Share my screen. Doo-doo-doo. All right. Yeah, can people see that? Can you see that? Hey. Oh, okay. So you can't see me. You can see my screen, right?
Yeah, yeah. If you want to make it a bit bigger, though.
Oh, a bit bigger. Interesting. How do I do that?
If actually, hold on one sec. Let me see. Actually, I think that's okay. I think that's good enough.
All right. Yeah, because it looks full screen on my end. So
Okay.
I'm sure.
No, I meant the sorry, I meant the font size bigger.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that I can do.
Okay.
Sure. So like, how's that? Cool. At least for the editor, I was able to do that. So
There we go. That looks much better.
great. Yeah. So just for a little bit of context, I just opened up an ASP.NET Core application. It's like a basic Tinder for books app kind of deal. I like to read a lot, so it's very simple app where it will randomly give me a list of books that I can choose to read or not read and don't add to my shelf. So there's actually a couple bugs in here that we can definitely take a look at. But first, I want to give just like a brief overview. If you're new to Visual Studio, welcome. But yeah, so like the basic core of a lot of debugging across all IDEs are your breakpoints and your stepping mechanics. So breakpoints are basically, in this case, dots that you can place at a particular line of code where you want your code's execution to stop at when you run your code's execution. So if you're experiencing an issue with your code and you want to investigate one specific place, then you can tell your program to stop once it reaches, in this case, like this line that's like books at index i.cover, and use the tools available to you in the IDE to inspect your variables and anything else that you want to investigate. So in my case, I want to place a breakpoint up at the start. And some new things that have come up since we last chatted, especially as we approach Visual Studio 2022, is just something as simple as being able to see that you can even place breakpoints in this gutter over here. Pre VS 2022, you couldn't see this. So if you're new to programming, if you're new to debugging, you may not know that you can just place a breakpoint wherever you want to place it in your code. So now you get like a little hoverable icon that lets you see that, which is nice. So I'll place one at the start, and we can hit run.
It's those little things that I always appreciate.
It really is, yeah. And I was putting this demo together last night and realized it's interesting since left the team. It's like, wow, they added all these cool features that I started, and now are actually in the tool, which is really exciting. And it's just like the little things in life that make me happy.
Build that up. There we go.
And oh, we're gonna have this problem again, like last time where it just stopped. It's really weird.
Oh no.
No. Oh, okay. Here we go. All right. Yeah. So yes. So we've hit the breakpoint. This is the execution pointer. It tells you what line is about to be executed at any given point as you step through. So in addition to breakpoints, the other basic things you need to be aware of when you're debugging across most IDs are your stepping icons. So you have step into, which allows you typically to step into a particular line that might contain like a method call, usually. You have step over, which just lets you run your execution to the next line. And then you have step out, which usually takes you out of whatever that method call just was, back to the line that initially called that method. So from here, there's a lot of really cool, short and sweet tools that we can take a look at. So for instance, something as simple as just being able to quickly navigate from one line to the next that I want to inspect. So let's say I wanted to identify this JSON string variable here after it's been loaded up with all of my book data. So I could just step over as usual, but depending on what your code is, you may not want to do that. Like you could end up in a for loop possibly in your code where you're constantly having to step until you're out of the for loop, which you may not want to do and can be time consuming. But one of my favorite tools is a feature called run to click. So if you hover over the line you want to run your code's execution up to, there'll be this green glyph icon here. And when you click it, it will run your code's execution up to that line. So it's like having a fast forward button on your remote control.
Okay. So if I did like have a for loop or something, then I could just put it like to the end of that and just say, go to here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So much faster than having to just step line by line until you get to where you want to go. So from there, if I wanted to take a look at this JSON string, I can hover over and get a data tip, which usually gives me sometimes helpful information, but this is not very helpful because this is in a JSON string format initially. It's really hard to read all this data, obviously, and it even cuts off because there's so much of it. So what you can use is one of Visual Studio's built-in text visualizers, which allows you to see a more readable version of it in whatever way you choose. So there's 4 built-in ones. In my case, I want to check out the JSON visualizer. And you'll notice now this is like a far more readable version of that same data that lets me check out what I want to inspect. So I can even search for things too, like pages. So this is really cool. There's a bunch of different ones. If you have text that's formatted for HTML, you can do that. You can even make your own visualizers if none of those float your boat. And so all of them are available for you. And plus, they're just really good if you have a string that contains a huge block of text that isn't easily visible in a data tip like this. And you can just use the plain old text visualizer and get
Hmm.
a better way of viewing all this information.
That's still better than what you had when you just moused over it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So from here, the next thing I'd like to do is go to the end of my function. And again, I could use my nifty run to click tool, but the problem is I have added another breakpoint right here in this for loop down below. And if I were to just use simple run to click, it's going to go to this breakpoint first, even though I don't want it to. But a brand new feature that is new to VS 2022, which is now available for preview, and you should totally download it because of things like this, is called force run to click. So it acts like run to click, except it lets me skip all of the breakpoints that I might have in between without me having to either manually disable the breakpoint or delete the breakpoint altogether just to put it back because I still need it later. So in that case, I can hover over the line I want to run my code's execution up to, and then if I hold the shift key, then I'll get two arrows. So again, it looks like one of those skip chapter buttons on your remote control, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, and then it'll take me to that line without ever having to stop at this breakpoint that was here along the way. So this is really great. And from there, we can now check out one of my favorite tools. So if I wanted to inspect, I have this list of books here that I'd like to check out. And again, once I'm looking at this data tip, if I were to expand it out, and actually I'm going to pin this, if I were to expand this out, you'll notice this is not the most useful information. It's just giving me the type of book or the type of the type that this object is. In particular, is a book.
Right.
If I wanted to identify quickly each book by like their title or their author, it's really hard to do. I'd have to expand each of these out, and there's like 100 books in this list, and that's not fun at all. So what we can use is something called a pinnable property. So to do that, I can expand one of these out, and then over by the properties, there's a pin icon that will show up. And what I can do is pin one of these properties. In this case, I want the title. And you'll notice that that property gets bubbled up to the top of this alphabetical properties list. And also, if I go out of that window, there's, oh, you can now see each book object being represented by that particular pin property. So this is really cool. It also applies to your locals, autos, and watch windows, which you can use to inspect all relevant variables at the given point in time in your code that you're at. So if I were to expand the books array here, I get that same result. And yeah, so you can pin multiple properties if you want. You can show the property name if you wanted to. Uh, there it is. And you can even just filter out if you have like a huge list of properties in a given class and you are only interested in the ones that you pinned, then you can filter out the ones that you didn't pin, which is great.
Okay. That's certainly more convenient, and then that also looks like it would eliminate that need to override toString.
Yeah, yep. So, yep, there are a couple options for how to get the similar job done. You can override your toString method still, but you may not want to do that if you're using your toString method for something else in your program. So if you have some data that you want to inspect in the debugging environment, but you don't necessarily want your users to see in the program itself, then you can either use pinnable properties or you can use an attribute that not a lot of people are familiar with called debugger display. So this is something that you can append to the top of your class definition for .NET. The equivalent in C++ is called NatViz, and that requires you to modify a NatViz file. But they both do the same thing where you can specify which properties you want displayed in your debugger environment for that particular class. Except the downside to this one is one, you need to be familiar with debugger display. I wasn't until somebody told me. Number two, it requires you to modify your code, which you may not want to do. And number three, it requires you to possibly restart your debugging session if you want to use this and play around with it versus using a pinnable property. You can be in the same debugging session and pin and unpin as much as you want.
Right, because the attribute would have to be recompiled into it.
Right.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That
Yep.
makes sense. Okay.
So is you have options. So whatever floats your boat. My particular favorite is Pinnable Properties, but
Okay.
yeah, good.
Um, by the way, as we're going through this, Conrad over on Learn TV asked the question if everything that you're showing here also works for F sharp.
Ooh, good question. I'm not fully sure. I believe most of it does, though. A lot of this is very .NET specific, and F Sharp tends to fall under that umbrella. So I'm sure most of it does. If it doesn't, feel free to email me and let me know. That's a great question.
Cool. All right. You do.
All right. So from here, why don't we go into the program itself and check out some bugs that I have experienced lately. So I'm gonna X out of this. All right. Okay. Yeah. So again, this is a very basic app where I can randomly be given a list of books and I can either choose to read or don't read. And I noticed one of the first issues I experienced was if I chose, you know what, I just want to read every book that could possibly recommend it to me. I could add all 100 books to my shelf and I'd expect to see them all get displayed here. Only I noticed that when I scroll down, it doesn't look like all the books that I'd expect to be there are currently present. So let's go in Visual Studio and take a look. So this has to do with my add all to shelf functions. Let's go there. And I want to set a breakpoint in this for loop and try to investigate how many books are really being added. In total, there should be 100 books that should be loaded, but it looks like only around half have been added. So the great thing about, so you have your basic breakpoints, but there's also a lot of different kinds of breakpoints that you can use as well to save you some time beyond just the simple ones, which is really great. So the first one is for the trace point, or for the print statement lovers out there, which is probably most of us. And this breakpoint is called a trace point. So to access that, I can do one of two things. I can either right click the gutter, which this is a new addition to VS 2022, and get a list of different kinds of breakpoints that I can add, and I can insert the trace point that way. Or I can set a regular breakpoint and go into settings and then go into actions. Either way, you'll be prompted to put in the same kinds of information. But in this case, I can choose to write a message that will get displayed in the output window, just like a print statement, only this time I am not having to modify my code. Depending on the context of what you're debugging, you may not even have to restart your debugging session. And yeah, it's a great way. It's a great way to have your print statement needs while also not having to waste time restarting your application or modifying your code in the process. So in this case, I wanted to identify all the index values that are being printed out. So I'll do index and then brackets, which will return the value of a variable that I state, and save that. And
So
my
those
breakpoint.
brackets, just like you would do in C sharp.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So from here, in my case, I'm actually going to restart just by nature of what I'm currently taking a look at. But for a lot of other scenarios, you shouldn't have to restart your session, which is great. And just a perk in general.
And hey, I appreciate you giving me console log here. I appreciate you giving me a print statement.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's like console log. We had such a close relationship, and we still do a bit strained these days.
Don't take it away from me.
I know. So I am going to perform that same action and add all those books to my shelf, and we're going to take a look at what's going on in VS. It might take a little longer because VS is having to log all this info. All right.
I never did read King Lear.
Neither did I. Although I actually do like Shakespeare. Minus I didn't really like Romeo and Juliet, but I really liked Macbeth, and I liked Othello. I liked Othello.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So if we go into the output window, uh, as you can see, there are my index values. It's kind of hard to see because it's in the busy output window. So you can get your values that way. But an additional perk of trace points over just using a console.log statement is you can use this diagnostics tools window that is hanging out over here. So sometimes I have a tendency to exit out of this window, but one of my favorite parts about this window is that it can log a bunch of different events that happen while your code is running, including trace points. And I can filter out everything but the trace points, which gives me a lot more readable of an experience instead of having to like search through the very busy output window for my print statements essentially.
Okay. I dig it. And it also then looks like, so a trace point, it will still like be able to do something, but unlike a breakpoint, it's not going to break your code. It's not going to stop your code.
Yeah, in this case, you actually have the option. So I could have actually unchecked this button that says continue code execution. So if you want
Okay.
to stop your code's execution, then you can just uncheck that and check out the trace point that way.
Okay.
Yeah. So another cool thing about the diagnostics tools window here, where I'm looking at my trace points, is I can actually go back to the exact moment in time where this trace point got executed from. So I can click activate historical or just double click and bam, I am in the past right now. So we just time travel to that moment in time where index equals 6 is happening. And I can also check out related variables or anything like that while also back in that.
I dig it. Okay.
Mhm. So, yep. So that I find that pretty cool. And then let's go back to the present. So, looking at, let's exit out this. So yeah, looking at the trace points that got printed out, my index value stopped at I equals 49. So that's only about half the books that I expected there to be. So at this point, I would like to just step through that last iteration of this for loop and investigate what exactly is going wrong that's causing only half of these books to be added. So I could just set a simple breakpoint here, but that's going to suck because when that breakpoint hits, I is going to be equal to 0, and I'm going to have to constantly step forever and ever until we get to the point where I is equal to 14. And probably you're probably watching Netflix while you're doing it, and you're not paying attention, and whoops, you just missed it. Now you have to rinse and repeat. So we don't want to do that. So let's use a
You
different.
basically just like gave the story of my life every time I'm stuck in one of those situations.
Yeah, true story. I do it too. It's like, really, I'm just trying to watch The Office, and oh, this stupid code is driving me nuts. So yeah, so let's use a different kind of breakpoint called a conditional breakpoint, which allows me to break my code on a specific conditional statement that I choose. So I'm going to use the new right click method here and insert a conditional breakpoint. And from here, I want this breakpoint to hit when I is equal to 49. And so I can change a lot of stuff here. So yeah, you can change from is true to when changed. You can also change from to hit count. This is most relevant for stuff like for loops. But yeah, let's just stick with the basics. And so I got this little plus symbol inside the breakpoint now, which indicates that it's a conditional breakpoint. And also, if you are having trouble keeping track of all the breakpoints that are now your new best friends after this, hopefully, you can go into the breakpoints window. And if you don't know where that is, use the global search tool. I don't know where half of the stuff is in Visual Studio off the top of my head most of the time, so I just use search for everything, and it's great. And it will give you the full list of all your breakpoints across your program, which is nice. All right, so from there, I'm going to restart the session and do that same action that I did before and see what results happen.
Okay. By the way, while that's coming up, Savvy over on YouTube asked a question about, and I think it was the pinnable properties, if that was a feature that was going to be coming to VS Code or not. I know you're not on the VS Code team now.
Yeah, sadly, I don't think it. I mean, I'm not on the VS Code team one, so I'm probably not the
Oh,
best, but
Right,
As
right,
of
right, right.
now, I don't believe there are any plans to have it be on VS Code unless somebody makes a cool extension, I bet, that goes with it. So yeah, sadly, it's currently not available in VS Code. I know that much at
Okay,
least.
okay.
All right, so we're gonna add all these books again and see what happens. And yeah, so this time I've hit my breakpoint. And instead of I equaling 0, like we usually expect it to, I equals 49. So we got to skip all that tedium and just got straight to the point. And now I can investigate whatever I want. So looking at what's going on here, I'm noticing that if I step through this, turns out the issue is that I am removing a book the same way that I'm removing a book at the same time that it corresponds with the conditional statement in my for loop, which is causing the number of books to be added to be cut in half. So let's comment out this statement and just clear out all of the books that could possibly be added to my shelf from neutral books at the end of the loop instead.
Okay.
All right.
If
Yes.
only all bugs were that easy to find.
Right. I know. Yeah, I think that's what's fun about using these tools in practice where I know for me it was kind of exciting where I was working on my own personal projects and I'd be like, I can actually use this tool like without having to think about it now, or like this is great, I'm actually in this scenario where this is useful to me instead of just using a print statement, and it's kind of exciting.
By the way, something that just dawned on me, which we should have brought up, is going back to Sadie's question about whether or not this is going to be available in VS Code. I just want
Yeah,
to confirm everything that you're showing, though, is available in Visual Studio Community, correct? Which is freely available.
yeah, all of this is available in community.
Okay. Okay. Perfect.
So yeah, I think the only one that is not available in community is the ability to go back in time to check out the exact moment in time where your trace points were hit or any other information that
Right.
turned
Okay.
out. But everything else is fair game.
Okay. Perfect.
All right. So problem should be solved. Just to double check, we're gonna add all those books again.
Chugga, chugga, chugga.
There they go. Awesome. Yep. So that's really cool. And I do have another bug that we can definitely check out that can lead to some other cool features. So let's go into rate books again. And I'm just going to refresh my shelf. And this one has to do with just some book information that happens when I add a book to my shelf. So I can choose to read the book. Never even heard of this one because it's like the Magic Mountain. It doesn't look very magical, but okay. Uh, Yeah, and so looking at this, I added a line that tells me how many times I've read the book because for me, I love to reread books, and so I want to know how many times I've read a particular book. Well, this time it's telling me that I've already read it once when I've never even heard of this book, so that's a little weird. But I noticed that, let's say that if I finished this book and then went back to it, now all of a sudden it's telling me I've read it 4 times. So I'm like the world's fastest speed reader, apparently, or there's probably something going on in my code, probably the latter. So let's go check this out.
And at 722 pages, in fact, you read that 4 times that
Oh
fast.
yeah, right?
That's impressive.
I can tell you the whole plot. It's about a mountain that's magic, riveting.
It's not just a clever title.
Yeah, 5 stars. So let's go place a breakpoint over here. And I plan currently to only use this breakpoint once, but sometimes the problem might be you're placing a breakpoint and you really only want to use it once, and chances are you're not even going to remember to delete it when you're done. But also new to VS 2022 is the ability to create a temporary breakpoint, which is awesome. So this is a breakpoint that will work once. So once it's hit, it will disappear automatically. So you don't have to worry about getting rid of it if that's what you want to do. So I'm gonna go back into the shelf, and here we are. And let's go investigate what's going on. So that times red issue has to deal with a property that's called times red. And I can use the search tool in my locals, autos, and watch windows, either one, to quickly navigate to that particular property, usually. But yeah, in the event it can be kind of slow, you can also expand out. And a nifty thing is you don't even have to execute the full search sometimes. If whatever you're looking for keyword wise is already available on the screen, then it will start highlighting what's already there, which is nice. So checking out this times red property, I think this is changing without my knowledge, but the problem is I don't know where that change is coming from. So obviously I could just go through and play some trial and error through all of my files where times red could possibly be referenced and do it that way. But that is not very fun, especially if you have a huge project that has tons of different files, and or maybe you're just new to a particular project, like you just started on a new team and you're trying to investigate this bug and you don't even know where to start. So what you can do is add a data breakpoint. So this is another kind of breakpoint that will break your code the moment that property changes. So to do that, I can right click on that property and then select break when value changes. So there's the breakpoint right there. It's usually not white, it's red right there. And again, you can check it in your breakpoints window. So this means that the next time that property changes, I will instantly be notified about it. So I'm gonna hit continue and see what's happening. I'm gonna go back to the shelf. All right, let's click on the book again. And immediately, and not what I expected, I get a data breakpoint hit notification. So this is really cool. It tells me that the breakpoint was hit. It will tell me what the previous value of that given property was, or and what its new value is. And oh, this is a new one. Oh, this is cool. I love it. They add stuff when I'm not even around. They added the ability to just hit continue in the window, which is pretty cool. So yeah, and so the best perk about using a data breakpoint is that I have been redirected to the exact point where that times red property is being changed. In this case, it's happening in the setter, which, yeah, I was already aware of. So I'd prefer to know what called that setter last. So if we go into the call stack and select the frame right below, then I get taken to this line. It turns out times red is being incremented under my get shelled book function, which is a function that executes when I just click on the book. I'm not even saying I finished a book, so I don't think this is supposed to be here. So go ahead and comment that out, and the problem should be solved. Oh, and you'll also notice that temporary breakpoint that I set, it is
It's gone.
here. Yep, it has disappeared. So mysterious. So really cool. If you really only have one use for that particular breakpoint, definitely check out the temporary breakpoints, which are oh,
So the TLDR here is go get Visual Studio Community 2022. That's what I'm sharing with you.
it's so exciting. Like so many didn't mean to do that. So many different tools have been added just across the board, not just for debugging, but for debugging especially. And there's still more to come. We're not even at preview 4 yet, and I'm really excited about a particular one that's coming very shortly.
Anyway, while that's coming up, Finn asked the question, can you recommend some content about debugging Blazor?
Oh, debugging Blazor. So unfortunately, most of the tools that that we work on, or that I did work on, are not so much applicable to web app specific issues like that, or at least on the Blazor side of things anyway. So I may not be the best person to ask about that, unfortunately. But
Okay.
I believe, especially in VS Code, especially, I think there's a lot of really good debugging extensions that are made specifically for like those Blazor based scenarios or Razor or any of those. And I mean, there's a couple tools in VS that I'm pretty sure work for Blazor and stuff. I mean, your basic breakpoints and stuff, quite possibly, depending on the scenario, should work. But yeah, I'd say give some of these tools a try, depending on what your scenario is. And if they don't work again, feel free to reach out to me. Complaints about it. So,
Perfect.
all right.
Give that a second to watch.
Yeah.
The light in this room keeps going off periodically.
What keeps going off periodically?
The light in my room keeps going off. Yeah,
Oh,
because there's like a motion sensor that's over there, and I'm like just sitting far enough away.
Just
So, yeah.
Yeah, I have a green light in my conference room right now that I'm in. And it's just like, whoop.
All right, there it goes.
Oh, did it go? There we go.
Oh, it was just in general, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so let's add another book and see if that issue has been addressed. I'm going to read this other book that I've never heard of. Sounds fun, just a random dude on the cover. At least it's not Moby Dick. I hated that book. Right. So this is promising. So it's telling me that I've read this 0 times, which is true, instead of once automatically. So we say that I finished this book in the span of 20 seconds. This book is a lot more doable. It was only 576 pages. I can go back and it should tell me that I've only read it once, and that's exactly what I get. So super exciting. Yeah, so I have one more set of tools that I can show, and then I can kind of go into like the lightning round of tools that we can explore definitely that I didn't have time to.
Yeah, let's do it. We got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, great. So yeah, so the next issue that I would like to check out has to do with this last line right here. So I have a tendency to read multiple books at once, and as a result, there are rare cases where I can finish multiple books in the same day. So I would like to know, in addition to the date that I finished the book on, like what exact time did I finish it at as well, which is currently not listed. So we can go into Visual Studio and check this out. So this has to do with this line right here. Again, I only plan on using this breakpoint once, so I'm going to use a temporary breakpoint. And at first glance, there's a lot going on here, and I'm actually going to refresh the page. All right. So at first glance, there's a lot going on with this line. We have this viewbag.time finished, whatever that means, and then we have some nested function calls going on here. So where do we start? So let's try to break down this line piece by piece until we get to the point where I can add whatever I need to add to include the time. Whoops. Fun. I thought I got rid of those. Welcome to the life of a PM. You get to see all the meetings that I have in a day. So from here, the first thing I would like to do is investigate this inner function call. So this is just the person.toString method here. But I don't know exactly what I'm going to be stepping into if I were to just use a traditional step into action. So what I can use instead is something that's called step into specific, which lets me pick what I get to step into first. So I can right click this line and then go to step into specific. And now I get a drop down of all the different methods that I can step into. In my case, I want to investigate person.toString first. And so just like a normal step in, that's just that, only I got to pick. So it's a really cool tool if you have especially nested function calls like I did, or if you have a bunch of daisy chained methods where one method is calling another one, which is calling another one, and you want to check out either the first one that gets called, or maybe you just want to call like the 12th one that gets called out of like 20 different method calls that are all happening on a single line, then that's the way to go.
I really appreciate that, because there'll be a lot of times where I'm looking at a line of code like that, and yeah, I know there's parentheses and everything else, but like I'm still not always sure, like, okay, what is being called first here? I really like that.
Exactly. I use this one a lot because, yeah, sometimes I don't want to have to go through the brain game of what's going there first. If I get it wrong, I'm gonna have to restart my session and stuff. So, yeah, this is nice. So this is just a basic two-string method. It's just returning my name in this case. So we're gonna step over this and step right back out. And now I want to check out the outer function call. So I can use step into specific again to hop into finish dot to or finish to string. Okay, so now we're starting to get some useful information. So we've got some string concatenation going on here that's being returned. And I want to be able to see what the return value actually is. But at first glance, that's usually not an easy thing to find. And as a result, I might find myself making an arbitrary variable that will return this exact thing just so I can see what is getting returned at the end of the day via like the watch autos or locals windows. But turns out you don't need to do that, because if you go to the autos or locals windows, by default, once you step over the return line, you can see the returned keyword come into play here, and it'll tell you exactly what your return value is without having to create any arbitrary variables to see that same result. So this saves a lot of time, definitely, if you don't want to have to make new variables for no reason.
I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, again, it's the little things. Yeah, so you can also go into the watch window and do something similar. So to do that, you can type in $, and you'll get a drop down of different ways that you can modify your whatever it is that you're investigating in the watch window. So you can check exception information if you experience an exception. In my case, I want to check out the return value, and I can get the same result that way. And the added perk about using return value in the watch window is that you can also add additional format specifiers, as they're called in this context. So to do that, you can add a comma, and you'll get a drop down of a bunch of different format specifiers that you can use to customize what's getting displayed in the watch window. So for instance, if I had an int variable that's being represented as a decimal, but I want to see what it is in hex, then I could use comma H, or if I had, or vice versa, I could use comma D. In my case, if I just wanted to remove the quotation marks around a string, I could use comma NQ, and the quotes will be removed. So there's a lot of fun little things that you can play around with in there. And luckily, there's a drop down the moment you add a $sign or a comma that can help you find or just experiment with all the different options that you have.
I appreciate that.
Yep. So from there, I know what's being returned here, and now I would like to step into this finish book string method. The problem is now I have stepped over this line, so I don't think I'll be able to do this, it seems, and I'll have to just restart my debugging session and try all over again. The good news is that is not the case, because there's another tool that I can use called set to next statement. And this involves essentially moving this execution pointer to the next line that I want executed. So I can just drag this up. Oh, too far. So I can drag this to the line that I want to execute next. Similarly, if you don't want to drag, you can also right click on a line. I believe it's kind of buried. That's the downside of this one. And do set next statement, which is right here, or Control Shift F10. Or you can use the same as if you were about to use a run to click execution. If you hold down the Control key, it will turn into a yellow arrow that represents that next statement as well. So this is really cool, but it's use at your own risk, because it's not the same thing as rewinding your code's execution. So all of that stuff that I just did has already ran. So depending on where you set your execution pointer, especially if you're going back to a point that's already been run, it could easily corrupt your code's execution depending on what that is, and would force you to restart your debugging session anyway. But it's really great if you want to do a quick reinspection of something you already passed, or if you want to skip over maybe a code block that you know contains a bug or something like that, or you just don't want it to execute while you investigate something else, then you can drag that arrow to wherever you want. So
Okay, but if it was going to be doing anything that would have side effects, like maybe it was going to like save to a database or update another value, like if I move that down now, that's not going to happen. Or if I moved it back and it's like writing a record to the database and it re-executes, it's now going to rewrite that record. So it's not doing anything like transactional there.
right, a lot of the time that is the case. So you can drag it however much you want, as long as you don't hit continue or step and stuff. It won't actually it hasn't executed yet this line. So
Okay.
yeah, but depending on what the scenario is, things could be rewritten or written twice, or all these other things that you may not want in your code at the end of the day, which would result in you having to restart your session.
Right. Lolo from YouTube asked the question if you can set the next statement anywhere, so maybe like also outside the current function.
Outside the current function, good question. Yeah, you should be able to. I don't want to try it just yet, but we can come back to that and actually experiment.
Okay.
Yeah, so I believe you should be able to though. And yeah, so from there, let's go into finish book string. Again, I want to step into specific kick, so. And from there, we're going to step to the end and see what gets returned. And thanks to return value, I can see what's being returned here. And I'm noticing that it probably has to do with this toShort string method I'm calling here, which is resulting in just the date being returned and not the time. So if I get rid of this, that should fix the problem. Now let's see if this will actually let me run. There are circumstances where, despite editing your code, you should be able to edit and continue, as you can see. Pause for a moment, and it automatically recompiled all my code without having to start a new debugging session, which is very exciting and has been buffed up again for VS 2022 with the addition of hot reload, which is excellent. It's like edit and continue had to walk so that hot reload could run. But from here, if I refresh this page, you'll notice that the time has been added. So that was a success. So as you can see, there's a lot of different navigational tools that you can use beyond just your traditional stepping mechanics, as well as some nice little format specifiers in your inspection windows that allow you to check out additional info about a variable in the way that you want it to.
I really dig it. I really dig it. And I certainly appreciate, because I'm definitely one of those where if I can string together 5 things into one line of code, or I can just return something and not declare a variable, that's always the way that I'm going. I know that that's very much a developer preference. So having then the debugger tool that's going to support that style is really nice, is really helpful.
Totally agree. Yes, it's really good stuff. Yeah, so at this point, that concludes my demoable stuff, but I do have like some slides hanging around with essentially a lightning round of other tools that are really cool that I hadn't covered yet.
Yeah, let's do it. We got about 5 minutes left, so this should be perfect.
All right, great. So let me scroll up a little bit and see where we're at. So this is from an old conference that I did, so forgive the theming and everything. But okay, so I want to give a shout out to anyone who has to write asynchronous code, which is a lot of people these days, because asynchronous code is really cool and really helpful for a lot of throughput related scenarios. So there may be times where you're going to have to debug that async code, and that's when it's not so cool, because Visual Studio likes to hide away a lot of critical information that could really help you out when investigating tasks, asynchronous activity like that, especially since you're no longer working synchronously and it's not nearly as easy to follow now that as far as execution goes, if you're writing asynchronous code. So one of the windows that you should definitely use if you're writing asynchronous tasks is the tasks window. And this gives you a tabular representation of all of the tasks and their given state at a given point in time while you're stepping through your code. So you'll get the IDs of each task, the status of the task. So a task could be blocked, or it could be active, or it could be scheduled, so it hasn't ran yet. And also, if you hover over the blocked status, it will usually tell you what that task is waiting for, or which other task the task is waiting for. And it'll tell you what time the task started at, how long the task is run for, where the task is currently at, and where the task was originally set. So this is a really useful window to use, especially when you use it alongside the parallel stacks window. And let me blow up actually. Yeah, and the parallel stacks window provides a more visual representation of your async code's flow and where everything is being executed and the given status. So if you're a visual person like I am, this is a really nifty tool to use, especially if you just use it alongside the task window. And you'll notice that like when you double click on a given frame within any of these stacks, you'll be given that particular task related call stack right down there, which is really helpful and can just give you a sense of the trajectory of a given task at any given time. And you can also use this parallel stacks window alongside your parallel stacks window for threads. So if you are making a multi-threaded application that also uses async code, then you can swap back and forth between the two windows. There's actually a button. Right here, there's like view tasks here, and there's a drop down that will come up, and you can use you can select threads, and it'll take you to a similar window, although in that case it's letting you see the threads and their whole status at a given point in time. And if you right click one of these frames, you can also see what task or what thread a given task is being run on, and vice versa, which is really nifty. So yeah, and then one more thing for the async people out there, especially, we've added this new ability to see rethrown exceptions. So in the past, if you've had an async method that's calling another async method, which calls another one, which calls another one, etc., and then all of a sudden an exception happens at that last method call. In the past, you used to not be able to see where that exception was originally thrown from. It would just take you back to the initial method that started this chain to begin with, which is not helpful. Ultimately, you want to see where was that exact moment in time where that exception got thrown from. So now you can see that information, and in a traditional call stack style, you can investigate where the issue came from, which is really helpful. And again, as I mentioned with trace points, you can also use play around with exceptions back in the diagnostics tools window under events. So I don't have any exceptions going on here yet because I fixed all my bugs. But if I did, you could select the exception that got logged. And if you have enterprise especially, you could double click it and be redirected again to that exact moment in time where that exception was thrown, which is really helpful in a lot of cases.
That's cool. And that's sort of like a perfect spot, I think, to wrap up on. So thank you so much for coming back on, showing off the debugger. I know I learned a lot, and I know I need to like really start to get better at actually using it. Like you've put in a lot of effort. I feel like I should use the tool. I feel obligated now.
Absolutely. Slow and steady wins the race. I think for me, it helped because one, I was doing so many of these talks and talking about it so much. And it's just like, I actually wrote down a list of features that I thought were really cool and just kept them at my desk. And then the next time I was like working on a project or something and came and encountered a scenario while debugging, I'd be like, oh, is there anything on this list that could help me out better than a print statement can? Turns out.
I dig it. All right, Leslie, thank you so much again for joining. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. That is Web Wednesday, and we will see you back here again next Wednesday. We're going to have John Papa on to talk about Svelte. So see you then.